What?
Oh my god.
What?
Look at my eyeliner,
What?
actually, it's kind of good. The eyebrows are a bit nuts.
Is it bad or good?
No, it's good.
Much that once was is lost, but none now live who remember it. It began with the forging of the great genders. One was given to the men, dwellers of the ancient halls of Reddit, masters of mansplaining and lords of the great pay gap. Another was given to women, those who compliment drunk strangers in the bathroom, and those with the great power to serve cunt. But they were all of them deceived, for another gender was made. In the land of ballroom and the fires of the gay bar, the legendary Tiresias forged in secret a secret third gender for those who did not fit into the restrictive boxes of male and female, a gender that was truly many, defined by their lack of adherence to the accepted binary. And into this gender was put a multitude of peoples and identities that the cis did not understand. Agender people, genderqueer, gender fluid, and more. Soon the cis realized that even many of those they called drag queens, those they firmly believed to be men in costumes, were actually of this third category. Their amusement at these acts turned to hate and confusion. For how could they relate to an experience entirely alien to their own? The men rallied against the third gender, convinced it was some sort of deceitful trick, only to turn around and find some of their own exhibiting some of its signifiers. These so-called Femboys caused the cis to freeze in confusion and... Dan, I don't think this intro is working. The Lord of the Rings metaphor is flimsy at best, and I'm not sure I'm entirely comfortable with the implication that non-binary people are equivalent to the One Ring, or that any gender fits into any neat set of stereotypes. So, do you not think this is, I don't know, at best reductive? No, I know. It's not your fault you haven't seen the sun since 1865. I have been working on breaking the curse, you know. Well, you could thank me later. For now, I need to bring a few more victims into our office, and we're never going to be able to do that if you insist on framing people as cardboard cutouts with no individuality. Now, do you want me to bring you the souls of 1,000 femboys, or not? Good. Then let me work. Are you a femboy? Statistically speaking, probably not, but you might be. If you are, I'm here to make you an offer you can't refuse. Sound good? Oh, sorry, let me introduce myself. I'm Brigitte, science and culture correspondent for British newspaper and death cult, Daily Telegraph, the only newspaper in the UK that's decided going after trans people is actually a bit gauche, so instead we're asking the questions that really matter to the great British public. Do femboys belong in the LGBT+ community? Spoiler alert, they very well might. So all the femboys out there, keep your ears open. I might be able to get you in. And honestly, I think you might have more in common with the transes and the gays than you might think at first. First things first, however, let's get our definition straight, since nothing else in this video is going to be, and define exactly what a femboy is. Now, since the dictionary is basically homophobic, I'm relying on Urban Dictionary for a definition here. Normally this would be a really silly place to look for information, but femboy is, for now, still a slang term, and honestly, I don't really trust a panel full of crusty old white men to define what a femboy is, when we have a whole community use it as part of the everyday parlance. First, I'm going to try out this definition given by user EVAXIV in 2009 for this one. Femboy. A young boy who presents extensive feminine mannerisms and actions, often blurring the line between boy and girl. Can be confused with a crossdresser, but usually refers to boys at a very young age or in their teens. Commonly used to define gay boys who dress like girls, but some can be straight too. Although this definition could be helpful, it kind of blurs the line between twink, teenager, and crossdresser in a way that I'm not sure really works. A better definition comes from 2022 by the user XXDX. Femboy, a male person who expresses a feminine personality and appearance, mainly homosexual/bisexual but can be straight in some instances, usually wears thigh-high socks, skirts, oversized hoodies, high-waisted shorts and crop tops. Very rare to spot one in real life, however, they can be commonly found on such things as Twitter, Reddit and Discord. Okay good, that's better. See, this one works, and I feel like it gets to where the term femboy has settled today in 2023. Before, it was a bit more vague and straddled a few lines depending on who was using it, but now, in the age of Twitch streamers and post-pandemic gender exploration, when people say femboy, they tend to mean a very femme-presenting male who dresses in feminine-leaning clothing, usually as some sort of social media performance, a sort of Web 3.0 drag queen that leans into the blurry line between genders in a way that often involves playful interactions with their audience in relation to the gender fuckery that's taking place on screen. Thank God, because the other Urban Dictionary definition I was looking at was femboy, a guy who really likes femurs, which is a whole different video. Femboys, as far as I know, aren't any more fond of legs than any other part of the body, never mind just one bone in the leg, and as much as I think Femur Boy would make a great band name, I'm actually here to talk about how femboys, particularly straight femboys, interact and relate to the LGBT community, and how that conversation has been playing out in a way that sometimes results in a community response that comes from trauma and fear rather than kindness and compassion, and how that feeds into something that I have been guilty of myself as a trans person in the past, a distaste for drag, based on nothing more than self-hate and fear of cis male violence. When in fact, we actually have a lot in common with our non-conforming siblings, whether they be drag queens, or femboys, or just someone who doesn't fit into society's rigid standards of what's acceptable for men and women in public. A lot of this debate has taken place about and sometimes with the Twitch streamer Finster, a self-described gender non-conforming male streamer who started leaning into femme presentation around the time of the coronavirus pandemic, and now does it a lot more often than most anyone else on the platform.
Like, it started in a different way. I started, weirdly enough, I started in the same way Woody did. I do Minecraft, and I still do. I still have a, 500,000 subscriber Minecraft channel that I still operate. I still run that. And I do that without even acknowledging any of this. I live like a Hannah Montana life of it. And I did that for I started in 2015. I think it must have been 3-4 years before I did any of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even do this on that channel. I did it on I made an Omegle video. You know that Omegle, that site, you see a bunch of dicks and a bunch of, people wanting to talk, I guess. Because I wanted to get everyone's reaction. A girlfriend at the time had done my makeup, and I did a video just going through all of that. And I posted online. I'm pretty competent with editing, so I put that on because I thought it was some funny footage. And it sat at 500 views for 10 months. And then in, I think, a weekend, it went to 400,000 views. And suddenly it was just, oh, I should be doing more of this.
Yeah.
Finster has been accused of playing into the internet meme The Trap, a pretty transphobic trope about males on the internet that trick men into thinking they're talking to a girl just to reveal that they were a boy all along. A lot has already been said about this a long time ago, and I'm not here to retread that ground, so go watch these videos by the Pedantic Romantic and ContraPoints if you're interested in going into the rhetoric behind traps, where it comes from, and how it's all pretty bad shit all around. Anyway, a lot of this comes from the way Finster plays with his audience on social media, especially after he posted a trans timeline of pictures of him in both male and female presentation. Obviously, as someone who isn't trans, this did confuse quite a few people, but I don't think this was malicious. In fact, I think we should be encouraging more people to be comfortable playing with gender presentation, even if framing it as a transition timeline is a little bit crappy, speaking as someone who used trans timelines for hopium during dark times in my life. Still, Finster listened to those criticisms and tried to take them into account. From what I can see, and in his own words, a lot of the reason he is so often posting things that seem like they reinforce the trap trope, try saying that 5 times fast, is because he doesn't want to come across like he's queerbaiting. He wants to make it clear he's a femboy and not a trans woman. The problem being that there is no way to express yourself online in the way Finster does without it calling to mind some pretty bad shit every trans person has seen, because a lot of the abuse trans women face is due to our being perceived as males with some sort of fetish, or men trying to trick people into thinking they're women. In reality, trans women are not trying to do anything of the sort. Trans women are women, but that doesn't mean that men shouldn't be able to explore their gender presentation. Trans women are not men dressing as women, but men should still be able to dress as women to their heart's content.
People will 100% say, because I get, I guess, called out for queerbaiting, I guess, once every month or so, by just do it in the same sort of way, the exact same argument that you'd made about it's a bit of an ick that you'd post something that could be seen as a trans timeline as a cis guy. In the same way, someone would make the argument and say, this is really queerbaiting because he's a cis straight guy, but he's dressing up as a girl. It makes people think that he's queer or trans or gay or whatever. So that's sort of what I mean. That's why I try and reaffirm it as much as I can.
You see, this is the problem. The frustration some trans people have with the growing popularity of femboys, between cis people conflating the two groups. But that's not the fault of the femboys. That's the fault of the cis people doing the conflating.
Hello, darlings.
And there's Daddy.
In reality, however different we are, we ultimately face similar problems. Problems that have been so long-lasting that they're part of the reason there's a T in LGBT to start with. Drag queens, trans women, cross-dressers. We have the same enemies. We know the differences, but those who want us gone don't care what those differences are. To them, we are all the same. To them, we are subhuman. Blame them. We have things to deal with that we have in common, that we can help each other out on. A common fight, many common fights in fact. For starters, femboys are fetishized, often for similar reasons that trans people are, and although as a trans woman I'm not exactly comfortable with the idea that I'm seen as the same flavour of person as someone who's explicitly male, that doesn't mean that the femboys we are being lumped in with are our enemy. Trying to tear down the ability of people to be more gender non-conforming in public will not change the mind of someone who sees us as some sort of new and different sexual conquest. But what it can do is make people less likely to feel comfortable exploring their gender presentation, which is exactly what we don't want. How many of us would never be able to come out if we felt less able to explore our gender presentation?
Now here's a question I get a lot. I'm gonna assume it's from a man. Am I gay for jerking off to your videos? Well, yes. You're gay now. That's how it works, Mary. It's kinda like Teen Wolf, only you're slowly gonna turn into Rip Taylor. So, I guess I'll see you at Pride, homo.
It's a net good that more people are feeling comfortable trying new things out gender-wise. If more people are allowed to cross-dress without the shame and violence that usually accompanies these acts, more people who could have spent their entire lives not knowing they are trans could discover that they are much more easily. And if someone cross-dresses and discovers they aren't trans, well, what harm does that cause us? If anything, it helps. The more breaking rigid gender norms is normalized, the less our gender presentations will be seen as deviant or wrong. Yes, a femboy is not a trans woman, but if they aren't claiming to be, why is it so wrong for them to be dressing in women's clothing anyway? Who says that that's not for them? The main argument I've heard against this is that they will be conflated with trans women, and frankly, I completely understand that. But I'm also certain that that's not their fault. And it's not on them. The idea of femboys being inherently anti-trans by their very presentation, because people might think we are the same, verges on victim blaming. Femboys are not asking for this to happen. Trans people aren't asking for this to happen. Instead of turning on each other, we should be targeting the people who conflate us, educating people on the differences between cross-dressers and trans people, about the differences between gender expression and gender identity, and this necessarily involves us standing up for each other in solidarity, wearing our differences, but also owning our similarities, on our sleeves. We have a common enemy in this. Conservatives, frankly, hate us both, and they don't care what the difference is between us. When a Republican politician riles up hate towards the trans community, they don't see a difference between femboys, drag queens, cross-dressers, and trans people. Any intra-group arguments we have will make absolutely no difference when they come for us. Yes, we are different, but we are also on the same side here. If a mass shooter comes into a gay bar and starts firing, to them, it makes no difference whether they killed a drag queen, a trans woman, a femboy, or just someone out having a nice time. To them, we are all the same. To them, we are less than human. When fascism rears its ugly head, we don't have time for semantics. None of us have a standard gender presentation, which makes us all a target for the same violent attacks. Now, that being said, I do understand where this comes from. So let me get into that.
Drag daringly explores and deconstructs gender norms. Drag race is a big deal for LGBTQ+ people, but for trans members of that community, it has sometimes left a lot to be desired.
I think it's unfair to hold certain people back just based on their gender expression, whether they're trans or cis, or something that's not yet expressed.
In 2018, RuPaul was asked about including non-men in the competition, and essentially shut the idea down.
He said, in part, the following: drag loses its sense of danger and its sense of irony once it's not men doing it, because at its core, it's a social statement and a big F you to male-dominated culture.
The Queen acknowledged a trans contestant who was on the show, but emphasized that she appeared pre-operation. A flurry of statements condemning the remarks soon followed. Ru eventually expressed regret over the situation, but this wasn't the first time she made problematic comments. Former contestant Carmen Carrera has called the host and show out for using transphobic slurs in the past. Drag Race has gone on to feature openly.
When I was a baby tran, I grew a dislike of drag queens through trauma. These days, I'm long over it, and I love drag. But I think it's worth understanding where resentment for drag queens in the trans community comes from, because I think it's the same reason people are getting so wound up over the idea of femboys. When I first came out, I looked, for all intents and purposes, like a drag queen. Hell, the day I came out in person, I went to my parents' house in makeup and a wig to force myself to have to explain myself to them. For those of you who don't know the old rules for the UK gender clinics, when I was first starting to transition, before you could get on female hormones, you had to do a real-life experience of 6 months to a year, depending on when and where you were, basically dressing and acting full-time as a woman, despite having no medical care, no assistance, no basically anything. British trans women were basically forced to spend an extended period of time out in public looking like drag queens. And you can imagine how that went down. Even today, the scare story image of what transphobes think a trans woman looks like is basically just a badly dressed and badly styled drag queen out in the daytime, which, given you probably wouldn't be given hormones if you weren't constantly dressed high femme, that would be how you would be living the next 6 months of your life if you wanted any chance at happiness as a trans woman in the UK. Seriously, I used to get notes from my therapist when I wore trousers because I was seen as too androgynous. Obviously, this resulted in equal parts fetishization and violence from cis men. Assault, both physical and sexual, was a constant risk, and yes, I did unfortunately experience both of those. Thank you, Gender Clinic. Very cool. There was no option to play down your gender until you felt that it was safe, and a few years in, I no longer wanted to. I wanted to live my truth, but to some people, they didn't know what that truth was. But to some people, they didn't know what they were looking at. I used to go to gay bars every week with the LGBT Society in Liverpool, and cis people would constantly take pictures of me, asking me to pose with them, even snapping pictures of me waiting at the bar and laughing about it to my face. To them, I had become a spectacle. To them, they'd seen a drag queen in the wild, and it had made their day. For me, I was just trying to live. I wasn't doing a performance. I wasn't cross-dressing. I was just wearing my own clothes, going outside and trying to have a nice time with my friends. And yet, because of how I looked, people acted like they'd seen a clown step outside the circus with a red-nosed long shoe still on. I was no longer a person to them. I was an object, a spectacle, a performance put on especially for them, not a person to be respected and treated with kindness, but a piece of art to be touched, to be photographed, to be commented upon. But I wasn't. I was just me. The many, many times I was treated as if I were a drag queen out in full drag, and the trouble it brought me, from physical injury to psychological scarring, along with well-meaning cis family members talking to me about drag stuff as if it were right up my street when I'd never really bothered to get into it, built a lot of resentment in my heart. And that resentment was misplaced. It was not the fault of drag queens that cis people saw me as a piece of performance art. It was not the fault of drag queens that violent men thought I was one of them and screamed it at me. And I knew drag queens from the community. The more I talked to them, the more I watched them, thankfully, the more I understood the difference between drag as an art form and drag as the brush I had been painted with. I had been blaming the wrong people for the hurt society had caused me. And what hurt them most, as I deprogrammed myself, as I learned to love drag, as I learned to stop being ashamed of the times where I resembled a drag queen and started to love it, started to get inspiration from queens, what hurt them most was how fucking similar our fights were, and always have been. Trans women have always been part of drag. Drag is an amazing outlet that lets a lot of trans people discover themselves, that lets them feel free to experiment with gender in a way no other art form can. It's honestly goddamn fucking beautiful. And now look at me. My YouTube channel is my drag name. I'm wearing a fucking wig. If I could do a death drop, I'd probably be out doing drag shows right now. I really learned to embrace the drag world, and it embraced me back. Fully. Without remorse. Because they know. Because they have the same fights as us. Because we have similar struggles. They're not exactly the same. After all, at the end of the day, a trans woman doesn't just stop being a woman when the lights on the stage go down. But a lot of our struggles do overlap, and we benefit from standing together, as we have for as long as there has been a gay liberation movement. And if that means that some straight people get to dress up, good. In fact...
Now, you have made history being our first straight contestant.
Wait, what?
Right.
Whoa, Maddie is straight?
Now, are you afraid that when you leave here, you won't be straight?
No. What? A straight drag queen. Wow, that's something new.
On season 14 of RuPaul's Drag Race, Maddie Morphosis, the show's first cisgender heterosexual queen, competed on the biggest drag platform in the world. Many people questioned what right she had to be there. Drag is, after all, an inherently queer art form, but Maddie addressed that head on.
At shows tell me, like, you're going to inspire so many other, like, straight men who want to do drag, and that's never been my narrative. I've never been saying everyone should do drag, because I think a lot of people shouldn't do drag. Drag is rooted in queer culture, queer history, it's a queer art form, and if you are remotely, like, homophobic, like, you have to work on yourself first, and men should explore their femininity. So many bad things come from toxic masculinity, homophobia, transphobia, and I'm not going to change the world. I'm not going to be what brings the dam down. I'm just going to be another crack in it.
To do drag, you have to ingratiate yourself with the queer community, know the roots of the arts, and respect them, as a part of queer self-expression. Maddie has talked about exploring her gender through drag before, and coming out mostly fine with everything she was born with and as. Is that not kind of a good thing? And is this not getting at a lot of the core problems people have with Femboys and with Finster in particular? If straight men are more able to experiment with gender presentation, does this not help our cause? The more this is seen as something cis men are free to do, the less the inherent reaction of cis men to drag queens or trans women will be violence. When something is seen as more acceptable to society, the stigma lessens. And what harm comes from having someone around who likes to wear skirts but doesn't want to transition? Aren't a lot of the arguments against that eerily similar to those that conservatives make about us? This brings me full circle, back to the invitation I promised at the start of this video. You didn't think I'd forgotten about that, did you? Well, this might be controversial, but I would like to invite Femboys to consider themselves part of the LGBT+ community. If they want to, that part's very important. If you're presenting as a gender you weren't assigned at birth, you're going to be facing a lot of the same shit that we face, and we can help you with that. More power to you. If you're not hurting anyone, should we not be standing together? Is gender non-conformity not somewhere under the trans umbrella? Like, explicitly, yes. But it's up to you, I think. But I, for one, would welcome you with open arms. And with those open arms, join our community. All you need to do is follow me into the antechamber deep beneath the city of London and bring no less than 3 goats for a worthy sacrifice. Lord Nontsbottom loves a femboy, don't you know? He'll be happy to have you. We'll be in touch. Until next time, ciao ciao. Thank you to my patrons for supporting this channel. You can join them for just £1 British a month, and with that you get occasional early videos and a shout out at the end of this video. Just like the venerable Joey Cobalt, Shaltier Scanjean, and Nerenia. Consider joining him. You too could have your immortal soul sacrificed to the Dark Lord. I mean, your name right out at the end. Why did that go French? Let's try that again. Consider Every time I do this, consider joining them, and you too could have your immortal soul sacrificed to the Dark Lord. I mean, have your name read out at the end. Okay, bye! Don't tell anyone about the blood sacrifices! Baguette. Are you a femboy? Statistically...